Hello, I'm Stanley Pranin of Aikido Journal. Welcome to another video blog. The subject of my talk today will be the relationship between Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, and his famous jujutsu teacher named Sokaku Takeda. Now, the techniques of this old jujutsu form of Daito-ryu Jujutsu or Daito-ryu Aikijujutsu, as it was variously known, form the basis for the techniques of most of the techniques of modern Aikido. And for this reason, it's important for us to have a good understanding of the relationship between these two extraordinary men and how Morihei took the somewhat rigid and battlefield-oriented techniques of Daito-ryu and modified them and imbued them with this ethical set of principles that eventually developed into modern Aikido. So let's go back in time and talk a little bit about Sokaku and his background and how it was that he came to meet Morihei. Well, Sokaku was born in 1859 near Fukushima, where the Aizu clan was centered. And as a boy, he was exposed to various martial arts, various jujutsu schools, and also a number of weapon schools. He became an expert swordsman. He was actually known primarily as a swordsman, but the jujutsu forms that he taught and that he developed later became the means of his livelihood, as we will see. When Sokaku was in his late teens, he began traveling around Japan as an itinerant martial artist, and there he would participate in the training in various schools. Sometimes he would challenge the teachers. If it was shown that his abilities were superior to those of the martial artists he came into contact with, sometimes he would teach. So this went on for a period of some 20 years, and then by the 1890s, when he was in his, he would have been in his 30s, he began to teach professionally, mainly the jujutsu forms. And he would instruct people who were prominent in society. They could be wealthy individuals or officers in the military. He also taught some politicians, people like this who had an interest in the martial arts. And he developed quite a following because of his exceptional abilities and through the word of mouth of his fantastic ability as a martial artist. Now, the relationship between Ueshiba Morihei, the founder of Aikido, and Sokaku begins in 1915. As you may know, Morihei moved to Hokkaido in 1912 and lived way up in the northern tip in an area which became the village of Shirataki. And there, about one day's horse ride from Shirataki, was another small town, a little larger, called Engaru. And at an inn there, introduced by a mutual acquaintance who was also a student of Sokaku, a fellow named Kotaro Yoshida, Morihei was introduced to Sokaku Takeda. And at that point, he participated in a seminar that lasted for about 7 days. He liked it so much, and the two of them hit it off very well, to the point that Morihei stayed for an entire month. Now, all of this took place in the month of February, which in the northern part of Hokkaido is really in the dead of winter. Every place is snow. And for him to stay this length of time without informing his family and just on the spur of the moment, it shows how much Morihei was interested in studying with Sokaku, and also it's an indication of the impulsiveness of his nature. Now, what is it that Morihei was learning? Well, you probably have some idea of what jujutsu involves, and Daito-ryu Jujutsu, as the art was known at that point in time, consisted of hundreds of techniques, literally, mainly joint locks, but also some nagewaza or throwing techniques too. And all of this material that Morihei learned from Sokaku became the stuff of the Aikido techniques that evolved over the years. So I'm going to show you some photographs later that show Morihei performing some of these techniques of Daito-ryu around 1936. So you'll get a bit of a feeling, if you haven't seen the art, what the techniques look like. And you'll also appreciate Morihei's level of expertise. How is it that the character like Sokaku is so well known? Well, of course, the fame of Aikido that developed later on piqued the interest of many people in Daito-ryu because of the fact that Morihei studied from Sokaku. But our real knowledge of what Sokaku did specifically comes from two sources primarily. Number one is the fact that he left several hundred pages of enrollment books, which have the signatures and the dates and the material learned, and then the hanko, the stamp of Sokaku students. And also there's another set of books, I believe there were 2 volumes, that were called the Shareiroku, which would be the payment ledgers, where it indicates who studied where at what point in time and how much they paid Sokaku for the instruction. So the fact that quite a number of these, as I mentioned, totaling several hundred pages, survives, allows us to a certain extent, track Sokaku's movements and also find out the kinds of people he was teaching and the financial level required to receive instruction in Daito-ryu. Well, Morihei actually was so impressed by Sokaku that he convinced Sokaku to come to this small village of Shirataki and move there to teach him, and then some of the other young men from the town of Tanabe, which was his native town. This is rather extraordinary because Sokaku was in demand as a martial arts teacher. It was expensive to employ him, and also why would he come to this really underdeveloped village? There's really nothing to do in the town. So the fact that Morihei was able to persuade him indicates, number one, that he had a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and a tremendous amount of ability, and also the fact that he was able to come up with quite large sums of money to pay Sokaku for this, exclusive type of training in Shirataki. Well, it turns out that Sokaku actually lived in Shirataki. He moved his register, his family register, to Shirataki, and that was his residence through the rest of his life. So just judging by these anecdotal evidence, we can get a real idea of the closeness of the two men and how much Sokaku regarded Morihei as a student, and then by the same token, how much Morihei considered Sokaku very important as an instructor, and what level he considered his teacher's abilities. Well, this first phase of their relationship came to an end in 1919 when Morihei received a telegram that his father was seriously ill. He went back to his hometown of Tanabe, took a detour to Ayabe, where the Omoto religion was centered, and spent some time there praying for his father's recovery. But when he arrived a few days later in Tanabe, his father had passed away. As is well known, shortly after his father's death, again in another show of his impulsivity, or his impulsiveness, I guess is the word, Morihei moved his entire family from his hometown for the second time, this time not to Hokkaido, this time to Ayabe, to live among the believers of the Omoto religion and to learn under Deguchi Onisaburo, the co-founder of the Omoto Kyo religion. Well, 2 years into his stay there, Sokaku Takeda appears in Ayabe. Now, the whole matter of the circumstances under which Sokaku appeared in Ayabe are really quite cloudy. Daito-ryu's side says that Morihei invited him because he needed help because he had several strong students, especially naval officers, who brought him to the limits of ability, and he needed his teacher there to be able to handle this situation. From the Aikido side, the fact that Sokaku showed up and had several members of his family along with him was totally unexpected and actually quite an imposition. Well, historically speaking, even if we can't figure out exactly the circumstances surrounding Sokaku's arrival, we know that he spent 6 months there teaching in Morihei's home, part of which was used as a dojo, and he was waited on hand and foot, as were his family's members, by the Ueshiba family. At the end of Sokaku's stay there, he awarded Morihei this certification called the Kyoju Dairi. This is a teacher's certification. And this is very important for the rest of our understanding of the relationship between Sokaku and Morihei. And I'm going to read to you what this instructor's certification said. This will give you an idea of the parameters for the relationship that was established between them in a professional sense. So this is the instructor certification for Morihei Ueshiba. It's dated September 16th, 1922. And again, this was given to Morihei in Ayabe. Number 1, when accepting students for instruction in Daito-ryu Aikijujutsu, be careful to choose persons of good conduct. Number 2, when instructing students, require them to write their address, name, age, location of their dojo, and the terms of their instruction in a registration book, together with their seal by way of authentication. This registration book would be the Eimei Roku of the sort that Sokaku used during his career. And Morihei also had several Eimei Roku when he began teaching on his own around various parts of Japan. The third condition is key. Here's what it says. Number 3, when instructing students, an initial payment of 3 yen should be made to Takeda Dai-sensei as an enrollment fee. Now 3 yen at that point in time, we're talking 1922, is a fairly large sum of money. Probably in modern terms it would be $250 or $300. It's difficult to make an exact equivalent, but that'll give you an idea of the range. And it's my belief, as a result of my research, that this Kyoju Dairi certificate and these conditions, especially the third condition involving a monetary payment to Sokaku, was a real area of contention, of conflict between the two of them, and was one of the major factors that would eventually lead to their split up, their going of their separate ways. But to go back to the thread of our story, after Sokaku left, Morihei remained until about 1927 at the Ayabe headquarters of the religion, and then gradually he began giving seminars in Tokyo to very prominent members of society there, various high-ranking politicians and members of the army, the navy, wealthy businessmen, etc. And during this time, he was teaching the art as Daito-ryu Aikijujutsu. He would use other names too, but this was one of the, everyone knew that Morihei's teacher was Sokaku Takeda, so this link between what would become Aikido and Daito-ryu was still very strong at that point in time. Now, Morihei would, in 1931, get a dojo of his own. It was built for him through a number of contributions. It was called the Kobukan Dojo, and it was opened in April of 1931. Just prior to the opening, Sokaku appeared in Tokyo, and he wanted to teach there because Morihei was just about to open this dojo, and he was there also to collect the fees that he felt he was due from Morihei's instruction. Now this process would repeat itself several times. We don't really know how many times that Sokaku showed up in Tokyo when Morihei was teaching there, but we know there were at least 3 or 4 occasions, perhaps more. And also Morihei established a base in Osaka, starting in 1933, where he taught members of the Asahi newspaper. And what he was teaching them was Daito-ryu. They gave it the name of Asahi-ryu, the style of the Asahi for the newspaper. But the techniques were still the Daito-ryu techniques that he learned from Sokaku, that he was beginning to modify little by little. Well, in 1936, a very strange episode occurred. Sokaku shows up at the headquarters of the Asahi News office, where Morihei had been teaching for 3 years already, and wants to see the person in charge. Well, this person in charge was a fellow named Hisa Takuma. He was the head student of the group of Daito-ryu pupils of Morihei at that time. And he told them that he was the teacher of Morihei Ueshiba, and that Morihei's abilities in the martial arts were limited, his abilities in Daito-ryu, and that he would take over the instruction to give them the highest level, because this was an important school, and the members were important because they were part of a major newspaper in Japan, and they had a lot of influence. Well, the ironic thing was that Morihei was in Osaka at the same time, although not present at the dojo. He had several locations that he would make the rounds to. And when he heard of the fact that Sokaku appeared at the Asahi office and was determined to take over the instructions, he promptly left Osaka and went back to Tokyo to resume his instructions there. Now, there's among the few scholars who interest themselves in this subject, there's a big discussion about what really happened and why Morihei left Osaka. Was Sokaku acting ethically and coming in and literally taking over the instruction of the Asahi Daito-ryu Club? Many aspects of this very strange event are shrouded in mystery, and I don't know that we'll ever get a clear understanding. But in some of my writings, I've touched upon the circumstances of this event in a bit more detail if you're interested. As I mentioned before in reading the conditions of the instructor certification, the Kyoju Dairi, these appearances of Sokaku, which seem to have been unannounced, and his demands for money, put Morihei under a lot of stress. Now you must remember that Morihei is not teaching in the same way that Sokaku did, in the sense that he had duties where he would teach, for example, at military and police offices and institutions, where they would have maybe many members, 20, 30, 40 people learning at the same time. So to collect this $250 or $300 fee from each of the students who was a part of the Army or the Navy or a police department would have been really impractical and probably would have been a deal breaker. So again, the vagueness of the financial arrangement, the obligation that Morihei had as an instructor of Daito-ryu was certainly one of the real sticking points, and it resulted in the split, the falling out of Morihei and Sokaku in the mid to late 1930s. 1936 is really about the last period we can document contact between Sokaku and Morihei. I mentioned that Morihei was really an amazing student of Daito-ryu Jujutsu. Now, it's unpublished, but I have some very strong evidence for the fact that during the Shirataki years, when Sokaku was in teaching Morihei, that Sokaku was grooming Morihei as his best student to become his successor. Now, this has never been published anywhere, and I will fill in some details on this in the near future. But we must understand that the contact between Sokaku and the connection with the Daito-ryu art, Sokaku, and the techniques, and also the certification, because Morihei actually gave out some Daito-ryu certificates as a certified instructor during the years up through the mid-1930s. So this whole relationship lasted in some form or other for about a 20-year period. Now later on, in the post-war period, when mainly Kishomaru Ueshiba, the son of Morihei O-sensei, wrote his historical articles and books, the extent of the connection between Sokaku and Morihei was downplayed, partially because of the tense circumstances that developed and the falling out that they have. But in some instances, the impression was given that Morihei studied Daito-ryu to a certain degree, but that there were other martial arts that had a big impact on him, and that it was some kind of a mixture of Daito-ryu plus several other arts that provided the technical basis for modern Aikido. Well, my research leads me to a totally different conclusion. Daito-ryu, I believe, is, I don't want to put a percentage value on it, but let's say it's 90% of the Aikido techniques evolve from Daito-ryu. Now, this is not to say that the techniques have not been modified. Indeed, they have been modified to a great extent. But just looking through the books that show Daito-ryu techniques, or watching films of Daito-ryu performed by the modern practitioners, any Aikido student will see the obvious relationship between the two arts. And but the proof, in the photographic proof that we have, I mentioned earlier, was photographs taken in 1936 by the son of the famous gentleman named Seiji Noma, who was the founder of the Kodansha Publishing Company, which even today is the largest publishing house in Japan. Well, this collection of photographs numbers over 1,000, and I'll flash just a few of them on the screen for you, and you'll be able to see the precision and the joint locks and some of the throwing arts and many of the pinning techniques of Daito-ryu performed expertly by Morihei Ueshiba. Unfortunately, there's only maybe 15 or so surviving photographs of Sokaku, and most of them are just posed, so we don't really know what he looked like in a technical sense. There's only, I think, maybe 2 or 3 photos that shows him executing a technique. But in any event, this is a kind of an outline of the relationship between Morihei Ueshiba and Sokaku Takeda, his teacher. And it's interesting, most of the jujutsu forms that existed in Japanese martial arts history have become extinct. But Daito-ryu is probably the most vigorous, the most practiced of the surviving jujutsu forms, and that fact is almost entirely related to the success of Aikido, which reflects back on Daito-ryu, which makes people interested in the art, and some of the Aikido practitioners have actually taken up the art to improve their knowledge of the Aikido techniques through an understanding of the origins. Now, through Aikido Journal, we've published a couple of books on Daito-ryu. This one here is a collection of interviews that I conducted while in Japan with the surviving masters of Daito-ryu that I was able to come into contact with. And one of them was the son of Sokaku Takeda, a gentleman named Tokimune Takeda, who provided a lot of information about Sokaku's young years and his teaching career. And he published a number of historical articles in the Daito-ryu newsletter that he published for several years. And this is an important source of information. It's mainly anecdotal in nature that allows us to understand some details about the younger years of Sokaku and then his subsequent teaching career. So if you want to go into the depth about Daito-ryu, this is the place to start. I also wrote the first historical article on Daito-ryu ever published in any language, and it consists of about 30 pages here. It documents most of the information, the understanding we have about the art, and of course talks a great deal about the relationship between Sokaku and Morihei. The other book that we published is a book that covers the techniques, the basic techniques of the art by Katsuyuki Kondo sensei, a good friend of mine and the top practitioner and instructor of Daito-ryu. And here, if you want to see what the techniques of Daito-ryu look like, well, they're documented in here. We have the Japanese text and then the English. And you practitioners of Aikido will be quite familiar with the content here, and I think you'll find it quite instructive if you look at the techniques and see these earlier forms, and you'll be able to understand, to a certain extent, Morihei's thinking in developing into a modern, more flowing form and softening some aspects of the art. So I hope that this brief overview has given you an idea of the basis of the long and very historically important relationship between the two men, between Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, and Sokaku Takeda, the disseminator of this very important precursor art known as Daito-ryu Jujutsu or Daito-ryu Aikijujutsu. So this is another video blog. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's many articles on the website that go into various topics that I've discussed in much more depth. And we also have a couple of videotapes done by Kondo sensei that will allow you to see what the Daito-ryu techniques look like. So I encourage you to use the resources at our website, and thank you for joining me today, and we'll talk again soon, and I'll pick out another topic of importance in Aikido history and try to fill you in on the details. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.